Good morning from Geneva, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this WTO Trade and Environment Week session, organized by the Permanent Mission of India to the World Trade Organization. This is the first of two sessions that the Indian mission to the WTO has organized in this event. I thank you for joining us this morning and would also like to remind you of the second session, which immediately follows this one at 11:30 a.m. Geneva time, which is 3 p.m. India time. The session, this first session is an introduction to two international organizations based out of India. In the MC12 ministerial decision, the ministers guided us to work with international organizations who had agenda or who pursue an agenda which would help benefit WTO members. And this session is an attempt to essentially further that mandate and bring to you these two organizations working in the space of environment and climate here in Geneva to the WTO membership. In fact, many countries that are represented today in the audience may well be a member of one or both of these organizations, and it's quite possible that you may not be aware of it. And this is precisely the information gap that we seek to plug, bringing these two organizations here to this WTO platform. We have with us the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. In today's session, we will start off with a presentation on the International Solar Alliance, after which I will introduce the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, followed by their presentation. We will take questions for both at the end, but those of you who are online, you can feel free to post your questions at any time. So without much ado, let me give a brief background on our first speakers. From the International Solar Alliance, we have Pragya Gupta and Sudhanshu Mishra joining us here on the stage. Pragya is a carbon finance specialist, currently working on various financing and advocacy initiatives of the ISA. Sudhanshu is a power sector specialist, having worked in the industry and now a consultant with the ISA. Let me invite Pragya to make the presentation. Pragya?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Pragya Gupta, looking at resource mobilization and strategy at the International Solar Alliance. Today, I would be presenting on what our various initiatives are across the globe. If we could put on the slides. Yeah. So let me walk you through today's agenda. I've divided the presentation into two broad categories. The first one talks about what the International Solar Alliance is actually doing. We're looking at the three pillars of programmatic support, analytics and advocacy, and capacity building. In the second part, I would be walking you through our synergies with trade and environment. Next, please. So about the International Solar Alliance. The International Solar Alliance is a member organization of 110 countries as of today, the last signatory being the US, the United States of America. We were founded by our Honorable PM, Shri Narendra Modi, and co-founded by the Honorable President of France, Mr. Macron, at COP21 in Paris. Our vision is to make solar a preferred choice of energy throughout the globe. Who are we? As I said, we have a global mandate to promote solarization across the globe. We're working across different geographies, different countries, and working in SIDS and LDCs as well. We recently concluded the 5th General Assembly, which was yesterday, and a lot of new initiatives and programs have been approved by the Power Minister in India. So let me move to the governance structure that we have as of now. As you can see, the president of the International Solar Alliance is in India. The co-presidency is sitting with France right now. We are 110 member countries strong with 8 vice presidents across 4 regions. We are in the Asia and Pacific region. We are also working with the Africas, in Latin America and the Caribbeans, and Europe and other regions. We are very strong with 5 committees, both regional and the standing committees, and we're looking at 110 member country right now. Also, happy to report that we have an observer status to the United Nations, and all 193 member countries of the UN can apply to be a member country of the International Solar Alliance. Moving on, let me talk about the 3 pillars of the International Solar Alliance, which are the programmatic support, capacity building, and analytics and advocacy. But before that, let me talk about what ISA's mandate is. We're looking to mobilize 1 trillion till 2030 for solar. This will enable us to actually promote 1,000 gigawatt of new capacity and also help 1,000 million people to consequently reducing 1,000 million tons of CO2 in making the projects viable. We're working on the 3 pillars of people, policy, and processes, and raising funds through philanthropic capital, through member country donations, and also a voluntary membership fee. Before I jump to the first pillar of programmatic support, let me also say that we have been working very, very closely with all the member nations and introducing a voluntary fee, which would be subsequently rolled out in 2023. So I'm now handing over to Sudhanshu to talk about the programmatic support.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Pragya. To facilitate the attainment of SDG 7, Universal Energy Access, SDG 13, Combating Climate Change, and SDG 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth goals through the following programs. We have 9 programs available with us. First program consists of scaling solar application for agriculture use. This particular program concentrates majorly on the regions which have very less or no electricity access. It generally consists of the rural area premises where we facilitate in promotion of solar water pumping system, solar home lighting system, and other small scale agriculture or healthcare segment projects. Second consists of affordable financing at scale, which is taken care by Pragya and the team for raising the money for achievement, implementation, and support to the member countries for the development of solar project. Third consists of scaling solar mini grids. It is basically for those regions or villages in the member countries which are having no or very limited energy access. So in this particular scale, we provide the mini grid structure for the implementation of decentralized projects for, in a better way, the project can be executed and get electricity access across the region. Program number 4 consists of scaling solar rooftop project, basically meant for energy saving perspectives for government buildings, commercial, industrial, residential, as well as for specifically for the healthcare segment, in which ISA, International Solar Alliance, is working very closely with the partner organization to develop rooftop projects across the healthcare segment. Then fifth program consists of scaling solar e-mobility and storage, which consists of promotion of electric vehicles as well as electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Sixth program is a flagship program, consists of solar park, in which the scale of implementation of large-scale solar projects across the region is being implemented for providing renewable energy access across the region. And it majorly consists of 7.5 gigawatt of projects pipeline, which we are currently trying to implement. Then program number 7 consists of solarizing of heating and cooling system, in which cold storages as well as solar heating infrastructure under the pilot project specifically meant for LDCs and the SIDS countries can be done, implemented under the demonstration projects. So there are several countries in which International Solar Alliance is executing the project. Then there are 2 projects which have been recently introduced: solar PV, battery waste management program, as well as solar for green hydrogen program. It's very into the elementary stage in which we are trying to develop the concept notes as well as webinars, organizing webinars, providing trainings to the people so that they can able to understand how to scale the project. Next slide, please. So what is the operative model in how the companies or member countries can engage with International Solar Alliance? First and foremost thing, we try to interact with the member countries through national focal points of the respective member country and try to understand the information regarding the which solar programs they are having, they require assistance and facilitation from International Solar Alliance. It can be done through expression of interest. With reference to that, our team engages with them very closely to understand the readiness of the member country and try to give them the solution accordingly. It can be in terms of policies and regulations, preparation of the site, doing the site visits, understanding the supply chain management, how the project and the implementation of the project can be done. And in addition to that, with reference to the discussions as well as understanding their requirement, we prepare a roadmap for the scaling solar applications, prepare the guidelines and the best practices so that this act as a catalyst to scale up the projects within the member country. Then support the countries to identify the projects, carry out pre-feasibility studies. In addition to that, after the study has been completed, then we support for the pilot project implementation for demonstration purpose that how that particular project can be implemented. And accordingly, after the implementation of the solar project, it can be scaled up within the region to provide a better assistance. So that's why, and last but not the least, is helping the countries to create a pipeline of solar projects and attract the investments accordingly. Second slide. With reference to this, if you see, we have engaged throughout the region, whether it is Africa, Asia Pacific, Latin American, Caribbean region, we have got a pipeline of 9.5 gigawatt of the projects across the member countries, which consist of 276,225 numbers of solar water pumping system across the globe, 1 gigawatt of rooftop projects across the globe, 785.6 megawatt of mini grid projects, as well as 7.6 gigawatt of solar park, large scale solar projects across the region, majorly dominated across Africa, as well as Asia Pacific, as well as Latin America region. Next slide, please. Now, in addition to scaling the programs within the member countries, we have developed a demonstration project and implemented small scale demonstration projects across the globe to demonstrate the countries as well as the citizens that how this particular projects can be implemented by providing a small 50,000 USD assistance to the respective member country for the implementation as a grant support for the implementation of the project. It consists of solarization of solar water pumping system, solar cold storages, solar street light projects, solar rooftop projects across the healthcare segment, as well as solar RO project in one of the country, to make them understand how this particular project can be implemented and then scaled up accordingly. Next slide, please. Related to this resource mobilization, I will hand it over to Pragya to proceed it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhanshu. Looking at the other initiatives that ISA has and coming back to the two pillars of analytics and advocacy and capacity building, we are working with the member countries and philanthropies to actually raise capital. So I'll go back. So I would talk about the resource mobilization efforts of ISA, both in terms of the projects on ground and in terms of what we are holding in different various member states. We are looking to raise capital and have raised capital from various philanthropies as well as member countries. We are proud to say that we're sitting at a very strong pipeline and pool of resources from the synergies and contributions from the donors such as SIF, which is the Children's Investment Fund. We're looking at Bloomberg Philanthropies, who have committed about 6 mil. We're also looking at Sequoia, MacArthur, GAP, and the likes. We are also working across various geographies with different organizations, international organizations across pillars of readiness, promotion of technologies, and investment mobilization. We are working with UNEP, we're working with ADB, we're working with World Resource Institute, we're working with the Rockefeller Institutes, and we're working with AFDB as well. Also, we are looking at, next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, again, next. These are the various capacity building initiatives across various countries and geographies. We're working with SIDS and LDCs, and we're working in various countries. This brings me to the second part, which is ISA's impact with the synergies and trade. As we recently concluded the 5th assembly of the ISA, we have launched 4 products and initiatives across the globe. The first one being the solar facility, which looks at the blended finance risk mitigation program for the Africas. We are also working with countries on the STAR-C application, which is the STAR technology and application resource centers in various countries. The third one is the supply chain manufacturing, through which we're promoting new and initiative products for solar across various geographies. And the fourth one is the investments for solar affordability. Next. The solar facility is a 2-fund project wherein we're looking at the investment funds, the insurance funds, and also a payment guarantee mechanism. Through this, we are actually pooling capitals from various philanthropies and routing it through channels in the solar projects in Africa. Next. The STAR Center, this is mobilizing private and donor monies, which we've spoken about. Through this, we are creating a conducive and a very, very strong environment for investors to invest in. ISA is directly working with the national focal points of various governments. So there is a safety net that ISA provides through which investors can come in, pool in their money and invest in projects in various member countries. ISA also is creating a very strong technical bankable pipeline of projects in various countries. So investors have a strong confidence in investing in those markets. This is the STAR Center and SolarX, the 2 initiatives that ISA is working in. STAR-C or the STAR Center talks about the technology of application and resource centers through which we're doing capacity building on ground of personnel for solar. We are working with various ministries in the specific ISA member countries through which we conduct trainings, do online webinars and seminars for their capacity building. SolarX is a new product which was launched yesterday. And through this, we are actually promoting investments in solar startups across the globe. By this, it's a 2-way synergy and a manifold synergy for both the startups and ISA, wherein startups are getting access to markets across the globe. And for ISA, we are actually investing in startups, thereby promoting new and innovative technologies across the globe. Next. This is the third wing wherein we are looking at supply chain, both to diversify manufacturing and also look at the reduction of waste. We want to enable technologies, and this will enhance trade between various ISA member countries. Recycling of waste here is something that ISA is working on. And also we're looking to create a standard which can actually contribute to each of the members countries' NDCs. This is a new product, and we are aiming to work with WTO closely so that we can enhance and modify this product for us. And which brings me to the last slide, which is basically a convergence of both the trade and environment, which the International Solar Alliance is looking at. We are looking at proving and entering into different markets through evolving technologies in various products and services for solar. And we're also looking at enhancing the trade relations between various ISA member countries through our products. By this, we want to diversify manufacturing for solar and make solar a preferred energy choice. At the same time, by looking at the environment, we are reducing the wastage by creating standards across global standards across the globe, which can be actually replicated and scaled in various member countries. We are looking at contributing, like I said, to various countries' NDCs by promoting solar as a preferred choice. And this leads to creation of a circular economy. In the end, I would just like to say that we are looking at an observer status at the WTO as well. And we are open to suggestions and recommendations from various countries and at this forum so that we can enhance our products and also look at enabling diversification throughout the globe. So thank you so much. is the team that we're working with. It's a global international team, looking at various plethoras of units, from the operations to supply chain to comms to KMID, and also projects and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pragya. And thank you, Sudhanshu, for your inputs. This organization clearly has several points of synergies with the discussions that we have in the WTO forums, especially in the trade and environment domain. When we talk about financing or technology or technical know-how, there is immense opportunity for the WTO members to collaborate with what the ISA is doing. And we hope to bring together these synergies to you in the time to come. We would now move on to our second presentation for the day, for the session. And I would now like to call upon Tanaji Sen on my right from the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Tanaji has worked in the advocacy function for leading non-governmental organizations for several years before he joined his current role at the CDRI. Thank you for joining us here in Geneva. And let me invite you, Tanaji, for talking about the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening to the colleagues joining us online. First, I would like to thank the Department of Commerce, Government of India, and the Permanent Mission of India to the WTA for the opportunity to present to all of you at this forum and platform about CDRI, which is a couple of years old as an institution. I'm the Director for Partnerships, Advocacy and Communication at CDRI, and I'm going to briefly talk to you about what the institution is about and what we're trying to achieve in the space of climate adaptation and infrastructure through infrastructure resilience and its linkages to trade and environment. Next slide, please. CDRI was, CDRI actually stands for the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, was launched at the UN Climate Action Summit in September 2019 by the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi of India. We are an international organization. We are based out of New Delhi as our headquarters, and we operate globally across member and non-member countries. So what exactly is CDRI? We essentially are a multi-stakeholder partnership of national governments, UN agencies, and programs. Particularly, we work closely with UNDRR, which works in the space of risk reduction, and UNDP, who are, let's say, the holders of the SDGs in a way, along with all of us, and multilateral development banks and financing mechanisms like the World Bank, ADB, IADB, etc., EIB, and private sector and knowledge institutions. What we do is provide a forum for countries at all stages of development, whether you're a high-income country or a low-income country, a least developed country, middle-income country. We provide a platform and a space for all countries to access knowledge and resources on infrastructure development, infrastructure investments, and infrastructure solutions, such that they can be made resilient and so that we can contribute to each other's economic growth and well-being. Next, please. So CDRI currently has 31 member countries and 8 member organizations. All of these bodies, countries and bodies sit on the Governing Council of CDRI, from which nodal constituencies operate and govern through the Executive Council. And the Executive Council oversees the Secretariat, which is based out of New Delhi, which is where I am working. Our focus in the coming year or two is to expand our footprint and engagement with African countries. We have a number of conversations going on, primarily because a huge chunk of the infrastructure investments of today and tomorrow is going to go into Africa, to be able to, for us to be able to actually realize global goals. And also in the Southeast Asia region, ASEAN region, primarily because they're some of the most disaster-prone countries, and they have some of the most insightful experiences on sustaining and ensuring functionality of critical services, including infrastructure assets. So We are not an organization which is proffering solutions. We are an organization which is seeking to be a repository of solutions, know-how, and exchange among member countries as equal partners. Next, please. So why is infrastructure critical to trade, and why is it critical to actually achieving global goals and adaptation? Well, because $80 trillion is going to be invested over the next 15 years in infrastructure. So what does that mean? What that means is that we are presented with significant challenges, because when you build and design an infrastructure asset or system, you build it, if you're building it today, you would have actually designed and planned for it at least 5-10 years back, and then got the financing. So you would have designed for a world which is very different from today. We know that climate change is here and now. We know that its impacts are quite unpredictable, but we're getting better at understanding how it's going to play out. Climate change is accentuating risks to people in infrastructure, and we need to design systems which will sustain not for today, but for the next 50, 70, 100 years. Infrastructure is built not for 5 years, but it's built to last the life cycle, which is many decades. And in this context, we have a situation where the world is increasingly urbanized, which means that there is a concentration and density of population living in certain geographies where you would build most of your infrastructure. So if you have a disruption in your system and a disruption to essential critical services, you have significant loss and damage to life and well-being and economies. So what we're trying to basically emphasize is that if you were to make and achieve sustainable development, you have to make infrastructure better. You have to prepare and develop better services for people and economies. From that perspective, we also need to map the fact that the world is going through a significant transition. We're talking about going from fossil to green energy solutions, which means we're investing billions of dollars into transitioning into greener infrastructure. Say you build and convert a country to 60-70% of green energy sources, and that gets washed out in the next 5 years because of natural hazards, because you didn't actually design and plan for that. Your entire investment is lost. Your entire investment is going to have to be remade. And that one disruption can mean that that country's economy, trade, telecom, businesses, services would be disrupted, because in concentrated urban settings in today's world, there are significant interdependencies. So what needs to be done? What needs to be done is to do integrated inclusive planning and investment in infrastructure, build sustainable infrastructure that looks at both nature-based, ecosystems-based solutions, but also blended solutions of gray and ecological solutions, and design your infrastructure and essential economic infrastructure, critical assets, to be climate resilient. And this is critical because if you build unsafe today, because you have not been able to look at what climate change is doing in your context, you are locking in risk. You're not locking in resilience. That asset or that system is going to repeatedly take knocks and shocks. It's going to repeatedly require investments to repair, restore, which means the cost of building that infrastructure is going to be much higher, which means that the money and capital required and the trade inflow required to build that infrastructure is going to be many-fold more. And therefore, infrastructure resilience is a priority for adaptation. Next slide, please. Next, please. Also because actually 79% of your emissions come from the infrastructure sector. So if you want to actually attain mitigation goals and targets, you have to look at cleaner, greener, safer, resilient infrastructure. And 88% of the financing that's actually going to go into adaptation is going to go into infrastructure. And the investment that you make is going to give you manifold return. As I was saying earlier, if you lock in risk, your investments are higher, your costs are higher. But if you lock in resilience by building and designing based on climate models and risk projections for your infrastructure systems, your costs are lower. Therefore, it is more economically viable, both to sovereigns and private sector investors. So essentially what we're trying to say is that resilient and climate compatible infrastructure is absolutely critical for us to attain the goals and targets we have set out in the Paris Accord, for the SDGs, and for Sendai framework. So what needs to be done is for us to consider that the costs of doing adaptation and addressing climate risks are an inherent part of development, are an inherent part of building infrastructure. And because we're going to spend $80 trillion in the next 15 years in low income, middle income, developing countries, we need to do it better. For many parts of the world, the delivery of the first generation of access and services to electricity, to water supply at home is a priority in states and governments. But doing it well and better is equally important, because we don't want to not learn from our mistakes and current experiences. So that fundamentally means that there's a need to do policy shift. There's a need to bring in and ensure that there is the committed and promised technology transfer and innovation transfers, that knowledge and capacities are shared as part of the climate financing agenda, and sustainable financing, which is risk informed, is ensured. Next slide, please. So what is CDRI as a coalition doing on resilient infrastructure? If the aim is to build better, build resilience in infrastructure systems, what we're trying to do is to deliver on climate adaptation through doing that, by engaging with member countries on research, knowledge management, advocacy initiatives to deliver at global platforms and for financing, by mainstreaming resilience principles across sector-wide programs, and working across stakeholder groups. So it's not just about working with countries and governments, but also with the private sector there, also with the communities there, also with the end users of infrastructure services, and doing it across various themes, which I'll come to in the next slide. Essentially, what we're trying to do is promote economic, social, and climate well-being of societies through disaster resilient infrastructure. And next, please. Thank you. So at this point, CDRI focuses primarily on 3 economic infrastructure sectors: power, telecom, and transportation. Primarily because these are drivers of how we are able to better deliver health, education, protection services, food, security. Essential to all of them is the functionality of these economic infrastructure systems. And when we talk about these sectors, when we talk about power, we're talking about generation, we're talking about transmission, we're talking about distribution. If you're talking about telecom, we're talking about digital, we're talking about terrestrial. In transportation, we're looking at airports, seaports, roads, rails. The priorities and needs are determined by what member countries need and how they would want us to engage, but also on what we feel would be critical to ensuring sustainability and supply chain resilience globally. So our focus, say, in the transportation sector is going to be increasingly on seaports and airports, therefore. Health infrastructure, primarily because we started a few months before the pandemic outbreak started, and it was essential to look at the challenges that were presented by the pandemic in terms of the resilience of health infrastructure systems. And urban infrastructure, because 70% of the world is going to live there in another 20 years in urban settings, and close to 80% of the infrastructure in the world is going to be concentrated in these spaces. By infrastructure, we also mean water supply. We also mean sewage systems, water treatment plants. All of this contributes to creating economic and social well-being for countries and societies. Next, please. And in each of these sectors, what we look at is what we call our thematics, which is disaster risk financing, capacity building, training, knowledge transfer, ecosystems-based or nature-based solutions, and ensuring that resilience metrics are factored into standard certification regimes of countries, strengthening governance and interface between economic infrastructure sectors and disaster management authorities, so that there is an integrated way of planning and addressing risks, and looking at early warning systems which can strengthen the capability of infrastructure assets and systems to respond to emergent risks and scenarios. While these would, at CDRI, you would have programming which would be probably exclusively looking at generation infrastructure and their resilience and their benchmarks and standards, or you could have looking at something which looks at risk financing, which will strengthen the capability of airports to take shocks and losses. So you could have blended programs of sectors and themes, or have standalone programs of themes and sectors. So we're also doing fiscal analysis for 4 countries to understand their budgeting and budget planning, and to see how they can factor financing into their annual budgeting, looking at average annual losses from disasters. And we have 3 flagship initiatives that I would speak of here now. And these are the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, what we call the Global Flagship Report, which is actually the biennial report on infrastructure resilience, global infrastructure resilience. And the third one is the DRI, Disaster Resilient Infrastructure Academic Network. I would be coming to the academic network last, and I'm going to start with the biennial report next, please. So this is the first of its kind report, and it draws significantly from the work that has been done on the Global Assessment Report here in Geneva by UNDRR, which comes out every 2 years, and which looks essentially at housing stock. But what we are doing is looking at infrastructure stock. We're looking at various infrastructure sectors, critical infrastructure assets in countries. And right at this very moment in these few weeks, the climate model that has been generated and all the data has been populated is running its results. And we are going to create a global infrastructure risk model, which will basically map out the status of infrastructure and their risk or resilience levels in different countries. It's also going to proffer a global infrastructure resilience index, which is being done through a survey that we are doing in partnership with Oxford University, which and UNDP, which is essentially looking at how infrastructure providers and users look at the functionality and resilience of the systems. And the thematic of the first iteration of the biennial report is nature-based solutions, which is also topical because it links directly to the global goal for adaptation, which is there in Article 7 of the Paris Accord and has been flagged as a key area of work coming out of Glasgow and heading into Sharm el-Sheikh next month. The other 2 pillars of the report are progress monitoring on using infrastructure indices against various SDGs and SFDRR targets and Paris targets. And the last one, all good and fine. How on earth are we going to finance all of this? And how is it going to work? What does it mean for financing? Where's the money, and who's going to put in, and what shape it needs to take? So there are 5 pillars, and this biennial report will come out every 2 years. And the first iteration is going to be released at the G20 summit next year in India. Next, please. This is just a further detailing of all the components there. We are looking not just at climate hazards. We're very mindful of the fact that we are looking at also geophysical hazards. And it's important to understand that maybe 6 or 7 or 8 iterations of climate hazards are required to potentially cause the same amount of economic damage and loss that a single geophysical hazard of a Richter 6 or 7 earthquake where you have not built safely would cause. So we're mindful of the fact that while the narrative is increasingly around climate adaptation, we're looking at safety and well-being of societies from both typologies of physical hazards. Critically, everything that we do is going to be open source. Everything that comes out from this report, will be put up on a open source data platform, which will be set up by University of Geneva and UNEP. And countries would be able to access the tools, the methodology, the models to utilize themselves, and also engage with us or others or other member countries who have the capabilities to essentially run these models for themselves at a subnational or a provincial level to design and inform their infrastructure planning and investments for the future. Next, please. The second initiative that we want to talk about is much more around, while the flagship report is going to shape the narrative around what research, advocacy, messaging, and work needs to be done on infrastructure resilience. The IRIS initiative, the Infrastructure for Resilient Islands initiative, is essentially working right at the front line of those who are already confronted by the impact of climate change and changing hazard patterns and risk patterns. It's a co-curated facility led by the SIDS and some donor countries, and was launched at COP26 by 6 heads of state from the participating donor countries Australia, India, and UK, and 3 of our SIDS members, first 3 SID members, Jamaica, Mauritius, and Fiji, across the 3 island regions. This facility, IRIS, is going to work across all island regions, Caribbean, Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Ocean, and would have regional hubs operating in each of these regions, and would be largely autonomously functioning and reporting directly back to the governance of CDRI. We started a 1-year inception phase last year. And at this point, we are ready with our first call for proposals to be announced on 17th at the UNFCCC Pavilion in Sharm el-Sheikh, whereby we will then start rolling on projects which will directly have an impact on what it means to do infrastructure resilience, and address climate change and adaptation for real on the ground with countries who are most at risk currently. Next, please. So this is just to flag that these are our participating countries and partners there. I also want to note that there is financial partners, which includes the European Union, but also non-financial partners where the American government and the government of Japan have contributed significantly through their know-how. France has recently deployed a specialist from their government to the IRIS initiative, and UNDP and ADP have been instrumental in designing and shaping the concept of the initiative. Next, please. And to say that we did, I think, 40 consultations that involved 80 different stakeholders representing all forms of voice across the SIDS. And some of our key partners are flagged here. Our hubs in the regions are going to be located at the Pacific Island Forum and the Caribbean Development Bank. We work closely with AOSIS, which is the recognized partner of the United Nations and the voice of SIDS, all the 58 SIDS nations. This is something that we look forward to actually demonstrating and probably coming back and presenting to you all about what has been the results. And one of the key things that did come out in our consultations was that it is critical for small islands to have trade and in goods and services and knowledge transfer to be able to achieve their resilience and climate adaptation goals. And so no better forum than to come and say that this is going to be instrumental for them and us through this initiative. Next, please. The last is something we'll be launching hopefully early next year, which is the DRI Academic Network, which is essentially looking at a hub and spoke model where we work with networks of universities or collaborators and work in the space of developing curriculum, generating know-how, sharing knowledge. Like, for instance, in our engagement with island states, we got to know that there's the University of West Indies, there's the University of South Pacific, which is an umbrella university of 12 Pacific Island countries. And there is some fantastic work going on in both these spaces. How do you make them meet? How do you get them to share that know-how? And we are thus a platform which is going to do exactly that. That's our mandate. That's our objective. University of Mauritius is doing some very interesting work with Oxford on resilience metrics and nature-based solutions for coastal protection. Something very similar is also being done by the Indian Institute of Technology and University College of London. We, being at CDRI, are able to engage and know of all of this. It's about bringing this knowledge, ensuring that we can not replicate, but amplify the work and research that is being done, to work across stakeholders, countries and cultures to promote inclusion and promote innovations and solutions and knowledge transfer. Next, please. So the program is going to essentially offer the list that is already up on the slide, but what I critically want to flag is that we have a fellowship program which has been extremely successful, which finances for a year very innovative and forward-thinking, futuristic research initiatives in the space of resilience of infrastructure. That's also going to be subsumed under this initiative. Our capacity building and technical training solutions are also going to be subsumed into this initiative, with the hope and aim that in 15-20 years' time, the future leaders in this space would be an alumni of this network, shaping climate adaptation, sustainable development of societies and their nations and their countries and their economies. That's the intent. Next, please. So why infrastructure resilience and climate agenda are so critical? Because I mean, I'm sitting here at WTO. I want to flag that if it is as is today, we're looking at 18% of the global GDP being lost if no action is taken. And even if we were to meet the climate target, we would have a 4% loss, which is still probably manageable. And we live in a world that is extremely interdependent for resources and services. And a major share of global supply chain and trade is through infrastructure, such as maritime and aviation. If you're going to talk about trade rules, we also need to talk about trade infrastructure. We need to talk about resilience of trade infrastructure, because a single disruption can cause significant impact, not just in economies, but in terms of the well-being of the most vulnerable. It can cause food security issues. It can cause access to health issues. Just a simple disruption in maritime or aviation infrastructure. We've built billions of dollars of ports. There is huge amounts of investments going into trade infrastructure. What if they're not able to cope with the changing scenario? And we know for a fact that they're not able to cope because they're not designed. They've been planned in early 2000s, will be finished by 2030, but they have to survive for another 100 years. And today's world is very different from what it was 20 years back. We are better informed and equipped to make that change and make the change now, because what we put in now is going to save us money tomorrow. And the value of global trade was 28.5 trillion last year, with the maritime industry actually accounting for 80% of it. How much of port and trade resilience is discussed as a critical factor in ensuring well-being of societies and economies and countries? So I think the narrative needs to probably take a sidestep and also factor in infrastructure resilience going forward. And to my last slide, please. Thank you. So essentially what we're saying is that at CDRI, we are charting infrastructure pathways for climate adaptation and resilience, with infrastructure being the operative word. We are definite, and everyone knows this for a fact, that infrastructure is going to be a key component of climate adaptation and financing agenda, primarily because, as I said, 79% of your emissions is infrastructure. 88% of your adaptation financing is infrastructure. And adaptation is going to be critical going forward, because we know climate change is happening. You can't live in a world and not be prepared to absorb the impacts of climate change in your economies and societies. And we as CDRI, with the leadership and of India and all of our members, with the co-chairship of United States now and previously of the UK, and working closely with all of our developing member countries, are trying to leverage action in this critical agenda, because it's going to actually make a difference in the well-being of people and societies across the world. The global goal for adaptation was charted out at the Paris Accord in Article 7, but it's only at Glasgow that it was actually really called out, and a work program was set up saying that we need to define what this means. And from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh, adaptation is now going to be a key agenda of sustainable development and resilience and risk reduction. So basically what we're saying is that we're going to work now. We are here to work with member countries, with non-member countries, to shape their adaptation agenda and their pathways for attaining sustainable development through infrastructure resilience. And what does CDRI do? We offer technical solutions, a knowledge repository, policy engagement to strengthen capabilities of governments to undertake their national adaptation and contribute to the global adaptation agenda, with a focus on infrastructure resilience and resilient infrastructure systems. That's it from me. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to my presentation. Back to you, Ashish. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Tanaji, for that very educative presentation about a new organization. While we wait for questions in the room or from the Zoom audience, I have one question for both of you. And perhaps we can start with you, Tanaji, on the COP27 plans. What's in store for you for CDRI at COP27?
Thank you, Ashish, for that question. It's actually very, very topical, and it's something that we are working quite busily on at this point. At COP, we are essentially looking to take our narrative forward from Glasgow, which was our first engagement in the global international arena on climate change and infrastructure resilience. At COP this year, we will be definitely announcing the call for proposals for IRIS, as we said, and re-establish and strengthen our narrative and engagement with island nations, because they are at the forefront of climate change and its impacts. And it's critical to make investments which will help them protect their own countries and societies from, it's an existential threat for them. And also we will be working quite closely with different multilateral stakeholders to address the issue of financing for infrastructure. And it's not just climate change, it's also disaster resilient infrastructure, because there is a cost associated with it, a minor cost in our opinion. But to ensure that discourse happens, we have a very interesting session where we are working with different development finance institutions and looking at how they are already integrating resilience metrics into their financing decisions and trying to understand what that means for countries when they want to access that financing. So that's the conversation we're having a lot of at COP this year. Last but quite critically, we're going to do the preliminary sharing of the findings from the biennial report on global infrastructure resilience on 11th and 12th at Sharm el-Sheikh, where we will be presenting what the models are showing, we're looking at a median range, how it's going to impact countries, what sort of losses and damages we're looking at, and therefore what needs to be done, and also the preliminary findings of the survey. So the index and the model are going to be socialized and presented for feedback at Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanaji. I'll ask the same question to Pragya on the plans for the ISA at COP27.
Thank you. And I think ISA has a pavilion at COP27, and we're looking at a range of about 27 events. 27 on 27 is what our theme is for this year's Sharm el-Sheikh. And just to give a brief, like I said, the ISA's mandate is to mobilize 1 trillion till 2030. So we are looking to launch a roadmap for solar investments as one of our flagship programs during Sharm el-Sheikh this year. It is in consultation with the WRI, which is the World Resources Institute, and Bloomberg Philanthropies. So that is one of the flagship programs that we're launching. The second one on communications, we're also looking at the solar investments, solar markets, and solar technology reports, which would be launched along with the World Bank and IFC Group this year. We are working with the Children's Investment Fund for launching these. And again, this would be done in consultation with SIDS and LDCs. A very new and innovative initiative that we are calling out for is called the SolarX. And we are going to open the call for application in Africa this year. This is for the solar startups in Africa. And Egypt is going to be one of the strong handholders for this program. We're doing it in consultation and in collaboration with Invest India from India. And we would be launching it at COP, again, for solar. Also, we have sessions on global solar manufacturing. We have sessions on the sustainable risk financing. And the third product that hopefully the minister will be launching in Sharm el-Sheikh is the one on blended finance risk mitigation facility. We are aiming to have a footfall about 100+ in the ISA pavilion, and everything from markets to technology to investments would be covered during COP27. So I think just a little brief on the programs that we would be launching and announcing during COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Pragya. We do have a couple of questions on the Zoom chat, so let me just read them out. There was one question about the contact information for both the organizations, so we will of course leave that with the WTO and on the Environment Week page. Then there was a question that this is from a LDC member, and the question is, there's a lot of, this is from a developing country. The question was that there's a lot happening for the LDCs, but my country, which is a developing one, is also being impacted negatively by natural disasters and climate change. How can we be assisted? Secondly, can the presentations be shared? So the second one, yes, I mean, presentations we will share. But the first question, Tanaji, what are we doing for the developing countries? And perhaps, Pragya, you can answer that later.
Well, I'm actually quite pleased to have that question placed, because actually, I mean, one of the things that I want to flag is that India is a developing country, and we are an initiative. Both of us are initiatives that have been set up and by a developing country to essentially provide a platform. Our primary goal is South-South cooperation. Our primary objective is to work with and transfer know-how and technology between ourselves, solutions and skills, primarily across developing countries where most of the investment is going to go in. Of course, the nature of assistance would differ for low LDCs, but the nature of assistance when it comes to developing countries and middle income countries is different. It's more about transfer of skills, sharing of skills, know-hows, solutions, technologies, financing, program mechanisms. And that's where CDRI, and if I may say, even ISA, are uniquely positioned to provision support to each other. So if a developer, I mean, if let's say that we are also working with Brazil on hydropower energy resilience, because droughts are impacting the dams. It's a developing country. We are also in conversations with Indonesia. We are in conversations with Chile. So there are, I mean, it's not to say, so just to give you an example that, you know, we are working across the spectrum. We're also working with Tajikistan. So there are countries from low income, there are SIDS, and there are also middle income countries that the coalition is working with. And it's primarily to reiterate and reassure that whatever we do is also available for middle income developing countries to partake in and curate solutions for. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanaji. Pragya, if you can also talk about the membership of the ISA and, you know, how many developing countries or some color to that.
I think, yeah, let me add to what Mr. Tanaji just mentioned and then take it forward from there. I think I would look at it both from a macro and a micro perspective in terms of how we're contributing to both developed SIDS and LDCs. I think at a macro level, by working with a specific country, and because solar is a renewable energy source, you're actually contributing to the country's NDCs directly. And at a micro level, because we're working with countries for project implementation on ground, we are infusing capital through the local NFPs or the national focal points, which are the various ministries. Could be the Ministry of Environment, could be climate change, could be the Ministry of Trade, and then we actually route the money and work with them on ground. So this is implementation of projects which directly lead to impact for the countries, which leads to meeting of the NDC targets. I think on the other hand, ISA right now is working with 57 developing nations as of now, out of the list of 110, which we are obviously increasing per day basis. We have the United Nations observer status, so we are contributing directly and talking to countries about what they want on ground for the implementation of solar projects. We are working with different philanthropic capital. So we have a very strong pool of resources sitting with us in terms of investments, which we are routing in different member countries, both in terms of grants and in terms of equity as well. So when we talk about countries, we are doing scoping studies, we are doing pilot projects, we are doing demos, and we're also doing large-scale solar projects in terms of solar farms, floating, and the expression of interest actually comes from the countries. So I think just to brief on how we're working with the specific countries in ISA, just to promote solar as a preferred energy source of renewables. Thank you.
There's one question on Zoom, which says that in several countries in Africa, sun appears more than 70%. Indeed, it is a source of energy, but it is not very usable and accessible because of the high cost of installation. So how at the end of these exchanges of the week of the WTO on the environment, can this problem have solutions? I mean, perhaps I can take that one, Pragya, and I say that I think the International Solar Alliance, the idea of inviting them to this platform was precisely to trigger these conversations, to see how the WTO membership can broadly work with international organizations such as the ISA and the CDRI. Of course, as Pragya mentioned, like they've applied also for an observer status at the CTE. So member nations can engage with them to understand their scope of work and their intent. And hopefully these conversations will start a WTO discussion about better international cooperation between this organization and what they have to offer. Would there be any questions in the room?
Can I add to that?
Sorry, I'll just let Pragya just add and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I think that was a great question. And I might just want to add on to the bit on the Africas that we are also, in terms of the grants and in terms of instruments, we are launching the solar facility, looking to mobilize investments in the Africas for solar projects. So we are working on different instruments such as the blended finance, we're working on insurance, and we're also working on a payment guarantee mechanism, which sort of gives confidence to the investors to work through various ministries and put money onto the projects on ground. So again, one of the flagship projects that we're working with, but because Africa is one of our major priority areas as well. So this is one of the flagship programs that we've launched. Thanks.
Thanks, Pragya. Please, if you can just introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Alev Mine of the One Goal Initiative. Regarding the sewage treatment plants, I hear that it's possible to integrate hydrogen production into sewage treatment plants. So just a side note, you might want to plan for that from the get-go. That might be a good idea. And regarding the resilience of infrastructure, I would like to ask what solutions and what designs are available and which R&D still is needed.
Thank you for your questions. The first one I understand is, if I can reiterate and you can confirm for me, is on the use of hydrogen as a fuel source for sewage treatment plants. No,
it is about because hydrogen production can make use of water, but it doesn't have to make use of drinking water. It can use sewage water that treated in an appropriate manner. And I have participated in other workshops as a really quite hands-on events. And I have learned that it is something that is being done. To produce hydrogen, so it would combine production of energy with the cleaning of water. So that would be a plus, I guess. It would save some effort. Yeah.
Indeed, if you could use wastewater to produce hydrogen, it would indeed be a use. And I know that there is a lot of cutting edge research being done in this space. Whether it's at a scale that it can be used is something which we'll have to understand better. I will submit that I'm not an expert in the area, so I can't comment specifically on the technicalities of that, but there is a lot of interesting research being done on alternatives, and this is one of those. Indeed. And the second question that you had was on what designs are there and what designs need to be done. Well, to be honest, DRI, disaster resilient infrastructure in itself, is an emergent subject in science, not in so much from an engineering perspective, because it's not that your infrastructure is not built to or there aren't benchmarks or standards of how exactly should you build a pillar for a bridge. It's known. The engineering science doesn't change. It's about where you build that bridge, what impact it's going to have. So it's more around the science and the management of the economics and social components of infrastructure that makes for improved resilience. Structural resilience is there. The reasons that structural resilience won't be there is poor practices, which is again a matter of governance then, essentially. So to answer your question, there is a lot of work being done as newer technologies are emerging. Like, how do you use hydrogen? How do you store hydrogen? How do you transport hydrogen? This is where infrastructure is being created. Trade systems are being created for this. So there are innovations and changes there, but technically in terms of structural designs, there is a lot that already exists. There might not be a necessity to do something unique or different or revolutionary in that space. But there is definitely a need to bring about gradual change in how we operate, govern, invest, and maintain our infrastructure systems and assets. Thank you.
So there was one question on Zoom, which was to say, how do we apply for grants? Pragya?
So I think for grants, our number one criteria is to look at the amount of funding that the organization is seeking. And secondly, it would be about the type of organization. If you're a private sector, then I think the initiatives that I just spoke about, the blended finance facility, which we're calling the solar facility, and the SolarX, which is a startup program, the two flagship initiatives are the ones that I would recommend if it's coming from a private player. Secondly, if it's a government organization, we usually recommend, and if the amount of grant funding is more, that it is routed through the national focal point of that specific country. So there's a very easy specific form, which is called the expression of interest, which you submit to the local NFP, and then the government submits it to us, and then we fund the project. So two areas, but if you directly want to apply, then SolarX and the solar facility are where you can actually apply. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Pragya. One more question for both of you, actually. So this question is about how do you engage the private organizations in different countries and member countries or in non-member countries to work with the organization?
Great. Thanks for the question. Well, actually, in our membership, private organizations, not as entities themselves, but as networks and coalitions are welcome. So we have got the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investments as a member. We've got the Arise Network, which is the network of industries and manufacturers set up by UNDRR as a member. So they are on a governance and engaging through that at a upstream level. In terms of the work that CDRI is doing, a lot of the delivery and provisioning and services of infrastructure are done by the private sector. So there are a range of firms that we work with for both improving practices, but also when we work in member countries, they also have private sector actors who they are engaged with, and we support them as required. But this is always, I mean, in terms of the modalities, it's always contractual. It'll be through tendering or and it will not be a grant-based thing if it's a private entity. But we are very, very keen to work with the private sector, because private sector has the capabilities and the solutions